The headlights on my plow truck lit up the dark street like a football stadium at 3 in the morning, and I was 6 hours into what would become a 14-hour shift clearing roads after the worst blizzard Michigan had seen in a decade. I had just finished the main arterial roads in Oakland County and was working my way through the residential neighborhoods when my phone started buzzing with a call from dispatch. I ignored it initially because I was in the middle of a tricky turn on Maple Ridge Drive, but when it rang again immediately, I knew something was up. "Adam here," I answered through my Bluetooth, keeping both hands on the wheel as the massive plow blade scraped another layer of ice and snow off the asphalt. "Hey, Adam, it's Cheryl from dispatch. We just got a weird one. Police are asking why you're plowing residential streets with your emergency lights on. Apparently, someone called 911 about a disturbance." I felt my jaw clench. This was the third winter I had been running emergency snow removal for Oakland County, and I had never once received a complaint about my lights. In fact, the lights were legally required when I was operating as an emergency contractor. The amber strobes and LED light bars were there to warn other drivers, to prevent accidents, to save lives. Tell them I'm an emergency services contractor. I have every right to use warning lights during active operations. We're under a state of emergency declaration, for crying out loud. I know, Cheryl said, sounding tired. "Just giving you a heads up. The officer said the caller was pretty insistent, something about HOA rules." That made my blood pressure spike. I had purchased my house on Maple Ridge Drive in the Pleasant Meadows subdivision 2 years ago, and the HOA had been a thorn in my side ever since. They had rules about everything from the exact shade of beige you could paint your mailbox to the approved list of shrub species for front yard landscaping. But this was different. This was my job, my livelihood, and more importantly, this was about public safety. "Thanks for the heads up, Cheryl. I will deal with it later. Right now I have about 40 more streets to clear before dawn." I hung up and continued working, but my mind was churning. Who would call the cops on a snow plow in the middle of a blizzard? We had gotten 18 inches of snow in the last 24 hours, with another 6 to 8 inches expected before morning. The governor had declared a state of emergency. Schools were closed, businesses were shut down, and here I was, doing the essential work of keeping the roads passable for ambulances, fire trucks, and police vehicles. And someone had the audacity to complain about my lights. I had my suspicions about who that someone might be. Margaret Whitmore, the president of the Pleasant Meadows HOA, lived 4 houses down from me in an immaculate colonial with professionally landscaped grounds, and a doormat that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. She was 52 years old, always dressed like she was about to attend a country club luncheon, and had made it her personal mission to enforce every single HOA rule with the enthusiasm of a military drill sergeant. We had clashed before. Last spring, she had sent me a violation notice because my grass was half an inch taller than the permitted maximum. In the fall, she had threatened to fine me because I had left my work truck parked in my driveway for 3 consecutive days, which apparently violated some obscure bylaw about commercial vehicles. I had pushed back on both occasions, citing the fact that I was a homeowner with the same rights as everyone else. But Margaret operated from a position of absolute certainty that she was right about everything. The sky was still dark when I finally finished my route and headed back toward my house around 7 in the morning. My entire body ached from the tension of driving for 13 straight hours. My eyes burned from staring at white snow in the reflection of bright lights, and I desperately needed coffee, food, and sleep in that order. I had just pulled into my driveway and was shutting down the truck when I saw Margaret marching across the snow-covered street, wearing a puffy white coat and fur-lined boots, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Oh no," I muttered to myself. "Not now. Please, not now." But she was already at my driver's side door, rapping on the window with her knuckles. I took a deep breath, counted to 3, and opened the door. "Adam Olsen, we need to talk about your completely inappropriate behavior last night," she said before I could even get a word out. Her face was flushed, and I could not tell if it was from anger or from the cold. "Margaret, I just worked a 13-hour shift clearing emergency routes. Can this wait until I have had some sleep?" "No, it cannot wait. You drove through our neighborhood at 3 in the morning with those ridiculous lights blazing, making enough noise to wake up the entire street. Do you have any idea how disruptive that was?" I climbed down from the truck, my boots crunching in the packed snow. I was 6'2" and built like someone who spent their days doing manual labor, and I saw Margaret take a small step back as I stood to my full height. But she did not back down. "Margaret, I was plowing the streets. That's my job. I'm an emergency services contractor, which means when there is a state of emergency, I work. The lights are legally required." "That may be, but you violated HOA regulations." Section 7, subsection C clearly states that no homeowner may operate commercial equipment in the subdivision between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. without prior written approval from the board. I stared at her in disbelief. "You're joking. Tell me you're joking." "I am absolutely not joking. Rules exist for a reason, Adam. If we let everyone do whatever they want, chaos would reign. The HOA exists to maintain property values and quality of life for all residents. I was plowing the roads, the same roads you drive on. If I had not cleared them, you would not be able to get your car out of your garage. That's what the city is supposed to do," she said, crossing her arms. "The city contracts with private operators like me during emergencies. That's how it works. We don't have enough city employees to handle a storm of this magnitude, so they bring in private contractors who have the equipment and expertise. I have been doing this for over a decade." "Well, you're still in violation of HOA rules, and I have called the police to file a formal complaint. I expect this behavior to stop immediately, or there will be consequences." She turned and walked away before I could respond, her boots leaving pristine tracks in the snow. I stood there in my driveway, exhausted and furious, watching her disappear into her house. Then I went inside, collapsed on my couch, and fell asleep still wearing my work clothes. I woke up 6 hours later to my phone ringing. It was my business partner, Derek, who ran the administrative side of our emergency services contracting company while I handled the fieldwork. "Dude, what is going on? I just got an email from some HOA lady threatening legal action if you don't stop operating your equipment in the subdivision." I rubbed my eyes and sat up, my back protesting from the awkward position I had been sleeping in. "Yeah, that would be Margaret. She called the cops on me last night for plowing with my lights on." "Are you serious? During the state of emergency?" "Dead serious. She says I violated some HOA rule about operating commercial equipment at night." Derek was quiet for a moment. "Adam, you know that's not enforceable, right? Your work falls under essential services exemptions. No HOA can prohibit emergency services operations." "I know that, and you know that, but Margaret doesn't care. She thinks the HOA rules supersede everything, including state law and common sense." "Well, we need to shut this down fast. If she starts making official complaints, it could affect our county contracts. I will draft a response citing the relevant statutes and send it to the HOA board. In the meantime, Don't engage with her. Just do your job." "That's the plan," I said, though I had a sinking feeling this was not going to be resolved easily. The next snowstorm hit 3 days later. This time it was a quick-moving system that dropped 8 inches overnight, and once again I was called out at 2 in the morning to clear the priority routes. I knew I would have to drive through Pleasant Meadows, and I knew Margaret would probably lose her mind, but I had a job to do. Lives could be at stake. If an ambulance could not get through because the roads were blocked, if a fire truck got stuck in the snow, people could die. That was not an exaggeration or melodrama. It was simple fact. Sure enough, as I was making my pass down Maple Ridge Drive around 4 in the morning, I saw lights come on in Margaret's house. Then I saw her front door open, and she stood there in her bathrobe, glaring at me as I drove past. I kept my eyes forward and continued working, but I knew there would be repercussions. The next morning, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. It was from the Pleasant Meadows HOA board, signed by Margaret and 2 other board members, informing me that I was being fined $500 for violating the noise ordinance and the commercial equipment restriction. The letter also stated that if I continued to operate my equipment in violation of HOA rules, the fines would increase to $1,000 per occurrence, and the HOA would pursue legal action to place a lien on my property. I called Derek immediately. "They're threatening to put a lien on my house." "What? Let me see that letter." I scanned it and emailed it to him. A few minutes later, he called me back, and I could hear the anger in his voice. "This is complete garbage. They have no legal standing to do any of this. You're performing essential services under a state emergency declaration. I'm going to contact our attorney and have them send a cease and desist letter to the HOA. This ends now." Our attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen who specialized in business and contract law, drafted a strongly worded letter explaining that emergency services contractors were exempt from local ordinances and private covenants during declared emergencies. She cited multiple Michigan statutes and case law precedents, making it crystal clear that the HOA had no authority to restrict my work activities. The letter concluded by warning that any further harassment or attempts to fine me would be considered interference with emergency services and could result in legal liability for the HOA board members personally. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, we had another major storm system move through. This one was particularly nasty, with freezing rain followed by heavy snow, creating treacherous conditions. I was out for nearly 24 hours straight, working multiple shifts back-to-back as the county struggled to keep critical routes open. At one point, around midnight on the second night, I was plowing through Pleasant Meadows when I saw police lights in my rearview mirror. My heart sank. I pulled over to the side of the road, put the truck in park, and waited. A sheriff's deputy approached my window, flashlight in hand. "Evening, officer," I said, rolling down the window and letting in a blast of cold air. "License and registration, please. Also, your emergency services contractor credentials." I handed everything over, my hands shaking slightly from a combination of exhaustion and frustration. The deputy looked over my documents, then walked back to his patrol car. He was gone for nearly 10 minutes, during which time I sat there watching the snow accumulate on the road I had just cleared. Every minute I was stopped was a minute that roads were becoming impassable again. Finally, the deputy returned. "Mr. Olsen, I have to ask. Why do you keep getting called in as a disturbance? There's an HOA president who doesn't like the fact that I have to plow roads in the middle of the night. She thinks it violates her HOA rules." The deputy shook his head. "That's what I thought. This is the fourth call we have gotten about you in the past month. Each time, it's the same complainant, and each time, you're clearly performing legitimate emergency services. I am going to have a conversation with the caller about misuse of 911, but I wanted to give you a heads up. This is getting ridiculous. I appreciate that, officer. I really do. I have tried to resolve this through legal channels, but she's not backing down. Keep doing your job. You're not doing anything wrong. He handed back my documents and walked away, but as he left, he added, "For what it's worth, thank you for being out here tonight. My wife had a medical emergency last year, and the ambulance only got to us because contractors like you kept the roads clear." That almost made the whole ordeal worth it. Almost. But Margaret was not done. Not by a long shot. Over the next few weeks, I started receiving more violation notices from the HOA. They claimed my truck was leaking oil in my driveway, which was creating an environmental hazard and a visual blight. They said my front lawn had dead patches from the salt. I was tracking in on my boots. They even tried to say that the amber strobes on my truck violated the HOA's aesthetic guidelines because they were visible from the street when the truck was parked in my driveway. Each violation came with a fine, ranging from $200 to $500. I refused to pay any of them, and our attorney sent more letters, but Margaret and the HOA board seemed determined to make my life miserable. It felt personal at this point, like she had decided I was a symbol of everything wrong with people who did not respect authority, and she was going to make an example of me. Things came to a head in late February. We had a relatively mild week with temperatures climbing into the 40s, and most of the snow had melted. I was catching up on maintenance for my truck, changing the oil and checking the Plow hydraulics, when Margaret appeared at the end of my driveway with a man I had never seen before. He was wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase, and he looked uncomfortable in the slushy conditions. "Adam Olsen," the man called out. "That's me. I'm Richard Hendricks, attorney for the Pleasant Meadows HOA. I have been retained to pursue legal action regarding your continued violations of the subdivision covenants. You now owe the HOA over $4,000 in accumulated fines, and if you do not pay within 30 days, we will be filing a lien against your property." I put down my wrench and walked over to them, wiping my hands on a rag. "Your client has been harassing me for months because I do my job. Every one of those fines is baseless, and you know it. The covenants are legally binding documents that you agreed to when you purchased your home," Hendricks said in a practiced tone. "Homeowners associations have broad authority to enforce community standards. Not when those standards interfere with emergency services," I shot back. "We have been through this. I have legal documentation from my attorney explaining exactly why the HOA has no authority over my work activities." Margaret stepped forward, her face tight with anger. "You think you're special, don't you? You think the rules don't apply to you because you drive a Plow truck. Well, I have news for you, Adam. Nobody is above the HOA. This community has standards, and you are going to comply with them or face the consequences. The consequence of me not doing my job is that people could die, Margaret. Do you understand that? When roads are impassable, emergency vehicles can't get through, people with medical emergencies suffer, fires spread. That's not hyperbole, that's reality. That's the city's responsibility, not yours," she said dismissively. "The city contracts with me." "How many times do I have to explain this?" Hendricks held up a hand. "Mr. Olsen, I suggest you retain counsel and prepare for litigation. We will be filing our motion next week. Good day." They left, and I stood there in my driveway feeling a mix of rage and helplessness. This had gone way beyond a simple neighborhood dispute. Margaret was trying to destroy me financially, to force me out of my home, all because I had the audacity to do essential work that occasionally inconvenienced her sleep schedule. I called Derek and Patricia immediately, and we held an emergency conference call. Patricia was furious when she heard about the attorney's visit. "They're playing hardball, but they're going to lose. I'm going to file a countersuit for harassment and tortious interference with your business operations. We're also going to request an injunction prohibiting the HOA from taking any further action against you. This has gone beyond unreasonable." "How long will that take?" I asked. "A few months, probably. But in the meantime, they can't actually enforce those fines. The covenants don't give them the authority to place a lien without a court order, and no judge is going to grant that order given the circumstances." "What if they try anyway?" Derek asked. "Then they're opening themselves up to serious legal liability. We would have grounds for a civil suit against the board members personally, not just the HOA as an entity." That made me feel slightly better, but I still had to live in this neighborhood, on this street, 4 houses down from a woman who clearly hated my guts. It was not a comfortable situation. March brought more snow, because Michigan winters are cruel and seemingly endless. I was called out for another overnight shift, and this time I made sure to document everything. I wore a body camera, I logged every street I plowed and the exact times, and I made sure dispatch had records of all my activities. If this was going to court, I wanted an airtight case. Around 2:30 in the morning, I was working my way through Pleasant Meadows when I saw Margaret standing in the middle of Maple Ridge Drive, directly in my path. She was wearing a heavy coat and holding up her phone, clearly recording me. I slowed the truck to a crawl and stopped about 20 feet away from her. I pulled out my own phone and called 911. "911, what's your emergency?" "Hi, this is Adam Olsen. I'm an emergency services contractor currently plowing roads under the state emergency declaration. There's a woman standing in the middle of the road refusing to move, and she's blocking my ability to clear the street. I'm on Maple Ridge Drive in the Pleasant Meadows subdivision. Is she in immediate danger?" She's standing in the path of a 6-ton plow truck. So yes, I would say so. I can't move forward without risking hitting her, and I can't do my job with her blocking the road. Stay on the line. I'm dispatching an officer now. I put the truck in park and waited, keeping my lights on and my phone recording. Margaret continued to stand there, her phone pointed at me, a triumphant expression on her face. She thought she was winning. She thought by physically blocking me, she could prove some point about HOA authority or neighborhood rights or whatever twisted logic she was operating under. The deputy arrived within 8 minutes, which was impressive given the road conditions. It was the same officer who had pulled me over before, and I saw recognition in his eyes as he approached Margaret first, then came to my truck. "Mr. Olsen, we have got to stop meeting like this," he said with a tired smile. "I would love that, officer. I really would." He walked back to Margaret and I could see them having an animated conversation. She was gesturing wildly, pointing at my truck at her house at the street. The deputy remained calm, occasionally speaking into his radio. After about 5 minutes, another patrol car arrived and a female officer joined the conversation. Finally, the first deputy came back to my truck. "Mr. Olsen, you're free to continue your work. We're going to have a longer conversation with the homeowner about obstruction and proper use of emergency services." "Thank you, officer. I appreciate your patience with all of this. Just doing our job, same as you." I waited until both officers had escorted Margaret back to her house before I started moving again. As I cleared the rest of the street, I could see her standing in her front window, watching me with an expression of pure fury. The next day, I received a call from Patricia. "Adam, you're not going to believe this, but the HOA attorney withdrew from the case. Apparently, after last night's incident, he did some more research into emergency services exemptions and realized he has no chance of winning. He told the HOA board they're on their own." Seriously. Completely serious. I also heard through the grapevine that the other board members are getting nervous. They're worried about personal liability, especially after the police had to respond last night. Standing in the middle of a road to block an emergency services contractor is not a good look. So what happens now? Now we press our advantage. I'm filing our countersuit this week, and I'm going to request a hearing for the injunction. With any luck, we will have this resolved before the next big storm. But Margaret was not done fighting. Not yet. What I did not know was that, while she had lost the support of her attorney and was losing the confidence of her fellow board members, she had decided to take matters into her own hands in a way that would ultimately lead to criminal charges. It started with small acts of vandalism. One morning, I came out to find that someone had spray-painted "noise polluter" across my garage door in bright red letters. Another time, my truck's tires were slashed while it was parked in my driveway overnight. I reported both incidents to the police, and they took statements, but there was no direct evidence pointing to anyone specific. Then things escalated. In mid-March, I woke up at 1 in the morning to the sound of breaking glass. I jumped out of bed and looked out my bedroom window to see a figure running away from my truck. The windshield had been shattered, and there was a brick lying on the hood. I called 911 immediately, and this time the police took the investigation very seriously. They collected the brick as evidence, checked for fingerprints, and canvassed the neighborhood for security camera footage. 2 days later, a detective named Sarah Morrison called me. "Mr. Olsen, we reviewed footage from several of your neighbors' doorbell cameras. We have a clear image of the person who threw the brick. It's Margaret Whitmore." I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. "You're kidding." "I wish I was. We also have her on camera spray painting your garage and damaging your tires." She was apparently not aware of how many security cameras are in your neighborhood. "What happens now? We're going to arrest her for vandalism and destruction of property. Given the pattern of behavior and the value of the damages, we're looking at felony charges. I wanted to give you a heads up before we make the arrest." "I don't want to ruin her life," I said, surprising myself with the words. Despite everything she had put me through, I felt a strange sympathy for her. She had become so obsessed with enforcing rules and maintaining control that she had destroyed her own life in the process. "Mr. Olsen, she committed multiple crimes against you and your property. This isn't about you ruining her life. This is about holding her accountable for her actions. If we don't press charges, what's to stop her from doing something even worse next time?" She was right, of course. I told the detective to proceed with the arrest. Margaret was taken into custody the following morning. I was not home when it happened, but several neighbors told me about it later. Apparently she had screamed and protested, insisting that she was the victim, that I was the one who should be arrested for violating HOA rules and disturbing the peace. The police were professional but firm, and she was transported to the county jail for booking. The story hit the local news that evening. HOA president arrested for vandalizing neighbor's property. Read the headline on the Oakland County News website. The article detailed the months-long dispute, the repeated police calls, and the ultimate criminal charges. It painted Margaret in a very unflattering light, describing her as obsessed with HOA rules to the point of criminality. The fallout was swift and severe. Within 48 hours, the Pleasant Meadows HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Margaret as president. They also issued a formal apology to me, dropping all fines and violation notices. The new board president, a reasonable guy named Tom who lived 2 streets over, called me personally. "Adam, on behalf of the board, I want to apologize for everything you have been through. Margaret's behavior was completely unacceptable, and it does not reflect the values of this community. We want to make this right." "I appreciate that, Tom. I really do. We're also going to be reviewing the HOA covenants to add explicit exemptions for emergency services and essential workers. What happened to you should never happen to anyone else." That conversation gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, something positive could come from this nightmare. Margaret's court date was set for late April. In the meantime, she was released on bail with a restraining order prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of my property. I rarely saw her after that. Her husband, a quiet man named Dennis, who I had always felt a bit sorry for, was the one who dealt with practical matters like bringing in their mail and shoveling their driveway. Patricia's countersuit moved forward as well. The HOA's insurance company, not wanting to risk a trial, offered a settlement. They would pay for all damages to my property, including the broken windshield, the slashed tires, and the garage door that needed to be repainted. They would also pay my legal fees and provide a written agreement that the HOA would never again interfere with my emergency services work. I accepted the settlement. As April turned into May and the last vestiges of winter finally melted away, I found myself reflecting on the entire ordeal. It had been exhausting, infuriating, and at times frightening. But it had also taught me something important about standing up for what was right, even when faced with seemingly absurd opposition. Margaret's trial took place on a rainy Tuesday in late April. I attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom and watching as the prosecutor presented the evidence. The doorbell camera footage was damning, showing Margaret clearly committing each act of vandalism. Her attorney tried to argue that she had been under extreme stress and that her actions were out of character, but the prosecutor countered with evidence of her escalating behavior over months, painting a picture of someone who had become increasingly unhinged. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Helen Brennan, listened to both sides before delivering her verdict. She found Margaret guilty on multiple counts of vandalism and destruction of property. Because the total damages exceeded $5,000, several of the charges were felonies. "Mrs. Whitmore," Judge Brennan said, her voice carrying through the courtroom, "you held a position of authority in your community, and you abused that position to harass a neighbor who was performing essential services. When legal avenues did not give you the outcome you wanted, you turned to criminal behavior. This court cannot and will not excuse such actions, regardless of your personal feelings about noise or disruptions." Margaret was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution for all damages. She was also required to attend anger management counseling. As she left the courtroom, she did not look at me. Her face was pale and drawn, and she looked like she had aged 10 years in the past 2 months. I felt no satisfaction in her conviction. There was no moment of triumph or vindication. Instead, I just felt tired and sad that things had reached this point. All of this could have been avoided if she had just been willing to listen, to understand that emergency services were more important than HOA regulations. Life in Pleasant Meadows gradually returned to normal. The new HOA board was professional and reasonable, focusing on legitimate community concerns rather than petty enforcement of minor rules. Tom, the new president, even invited me to speak at a board meeting about the importance of emergency services and the challenges contractors faced during severe weather events. It was surprisingly well received, and several neighbors thanked me afterward for the work I did. Margaret and Dennis put their house on the market in June. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that they were moving to Florida, looking for a fresh start away from the judgment and whispers that followed them in Michigan. Part of me felt relieved that I would no longer have to live near someone who had caused me so much trouble. Another part of me felt genuinely sad for how things had turned out for her. The house sold quickly, and a young family with 2 small children moved in. They were friendly and normal, and the father worked as a nurse at a local hospital. He understood odd hours and essential services, and we became casual friends, occasionally grabbing a beer together after work. Summer arrived, bringing warm sunshine and the blessed absence of snow. I transitioned to my off-season work, which involved equipment maintenance and occasionally helping with flood response in other parts of Michigan. The drama of the winter felt like a distant memory, though I still had the news articles saved on my phone as a reminder of how strange things had gotten. In August, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Margaret. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the envelope and unfolded the single page inside. "Dear Adam," it began. "I owe you an apology that I should have given months ago. I was wrong. I let my desire for control and my rigid interpretation of rules blind me to common sense and basic human decency. You were doing important work that kept people safe, and I treated you like a criminal for it. My behavior was inexcusable, and I am deeply ashamed of the person I became during our conflict. I have spent the last few months in counseling, working through my issues with control and authority, and I am beginning to understand how toxic my mindset had become. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I recognize the harm I caused, and I am genuinely sorry. I hope you are doing well, and I hope the new homeowners in our old house are better neighbors than I ever was. Sincerely, Margaret Whitmore." I read the letter 3 times, trying to parse my feelings about it. It seemed genuine, not like something her lawyer had forced her to write. There was a vulnerability in the words that I had never heard from Margaret, when she was busy being the HOA president enforcing rules with an iron fist. I thought about responding, but ultimately decided to let it be. She had apologized, I had acknowledged it, and that was enough closure for both of us. Some stories do not need to be extended beyond their natural ending. When winter returned in December, bringing with it the first major snowstorm of the season, I was ready. My truck was maintained and prepared, my contracts with the county were renewed, and I had a new sense of confidence about my work. As I drove through Pleasant Meadows in the early morning hours, my amber lights blazing and my plow clearing the streets, I thought about everything that had happened the previous year. The new neighbors' lights stayed off as I passed their house. Nobody called the police. Nobody stood in the street blocking my path. I was just a contractor doing essential work, exactly as it should be. I finished my route as the sun was coming up, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. The roads were clear and safe, ready for the day ahead. Ambulances could get through if needed. Fire trucks would not get stuck. Families could drive to work and school without fear. That was what mattered. Not HOA rules or neighborhood politics or petty disputes about noise and lights. What mattered was the work itself, the unglamorous but essential task of keeping communities functioning during the worst that nature could throw at them. I drove home, parked my truck in the driveway with its lights still visible from the street, and went inside to get some well-deserved sleep. Life was not perfect, and there would be other challenges ahead. But for now, Everything was exactly as it should be. The Pleasant Meadows HOA never bothered me again. The new covenants explicitly exempted emergency services workers from noise and commercial equipment restrictions. Other HOAs in the county took notice of what had happened and began updating their own rules to prevent similar conflicts. In a strange way, Margaret's obsessive enforcement and subsequent downfall had led to positive changes that benefited essential workers throughout Oakland County. I continued my work through that winter and many winters after. Each storm brought its own challenges, its own long hours and difficult conditions, but I never again faced the kind of organized harassment that Margaret had subjected me to. The new neighbors became good friends, and the subdivision felt more like an actual community rather than a collection of houses governed by arbitrary rules. Years later, I still think about that winter sometimes. Not with anger or resentment, but with a kind of bemused reflection on how bizarre the whole situation had been. Someone had actually tried to stop emergency snow removal because of HOA regulations. It seemed like something from a satirical article, not real life, but it had happened to me. The experience taught me valuable lessons about standing firm when you know you are right, about the importance of documentation and legal support, and about how easy it is for people to lose perspective when they invest too much of their identity in positions of petty authority. Margaret had not been evil or malicious in any traditional sense. She had been someone who genuinely believed she was doing the right thing, protecting her community and upholding standards, but she had lost sight of the bigger picture. She had forgotten that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. I hoped that her time in counseling and her fresh start in Florida had helped her find a healthier perspective. I genuinely wished her well, despite everything. Holding on to anger and resentment would only poison my own life, and I had better things to do with my energy. As for me, I continued to live in Pleasant Meadows, continued to operate my emergency services contracting business, and continued to be grateful for work that mattered. When blizzards rolled across Michigan and the governor declared states of emergency, I climbed into my truck, turned on my lights, and went out to clear the roads. That was my job, my calling, and nothing would stop me from doing it. The lights on my Plow truck still shine bright in the darkness, warning other drivers and illuminating the path ahead. They represent safety, preparedness, and the unglamorous work of keeping communities functioning when everything else shuts down. And if those lights occasionally wake up a neighbor or two in the middle of the night, well, that is a small price to pay for the peace of mind that comes from knowing the roads will be clear when you need them most.